Live NFL trivia every Wednesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge for a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. Last season, in college football, there was one running back that, if you were paying close attention, was taking the Pac-12 by storm. In what was an unbelievably disappointing season for the Arizona State Sun Devils, where the team started 5-1 and looked like legit conference title contenders before completely imploding down the stretch, there was one player on the offensive side of the ball that was an absolute bright spot. It was this guy right here, Rachaad White. He ended the year with an even 1,000 yards rushing on over 5.5 yards per carry, finding the end zone 15 times and recording over 1,456 yards from scrimmage. You could throw him the ball, or you could hand it to him, but one thing was certain. If you gave him the ball, he was going to make opposing defenses pay. There's a reason he finished the season ranked second in the conference in yards from scrimmage, and was the X factor on an otherwise underwhelming Sun Devil offense. It was a remarkable story for White, who went from a small Division II school in Nebraska to Mount San Antonio College, a community college in California, to one of the biggest conferences in college football, and he made the most of his opportunity every step of the way. And I was fully on board the Rachaad White train. He was one of my favorite running backs in the draft, to the point where he was number 3 on my board, only behind Breece Hall and the criminally underused Dameon Pierce. And when the Tampa Bay Buccaneers drafted him in the 3rd round with pick number 91, I thought it was a great pick, especially since they lost Ronald Jones in free agency to the Kansas City Chiefs, and they needed some help at the position. I thought the Buccaneers were getting a heck of a player who could provide an impact in both the passing game and the running game, and would be able to form a really solid 1-2 combo at the running back position alongside former first-round pick Leonard Fournette. Yeah, it hasn't quite worked out that way so far. Not at all. Because through the first 5 games of the season, perhaps one of the biggest surprises from a negative standpoint is just how ineffective White has been thus far on the year. Through the first 5 games of the season, he's carried the ball 16 times, but has only picked up 35 yards, averaging an abysmal 2.19 yards per carry. For some perspective on how bad that is, there have been 66 running backs in football to have at least 15 carries this year, and here's a look at all 66 of them on a chart. Right at the middle of the pack is New England Patriots running back Damien Harris, averaging 4.5 yards per carry, so you have an idea of what the baseline is. Of those 66 running backs, 44 of them, so 2/3 of them, are averaging at least 4 yards per carry. Of those 66 running backs, 64 of them are averaging at least 3 yards per carry. One of them is Sony Michel of the Los Angeles Chargers, averaging 2.5 yards per carry. The other? Rachaad White, in dead last by a ton, at 2.2 yards per carry. He's nearly a full yard per carry worse than the 3rd worst running back in the NFL. His vision has not been there at all. He's been struggling heavily in every single game when getting the rock, to the point where his best game in every rushing category was this past Sunday in a 21-15 victory over the Atlanta Falcons, where he tied his career high in rushing yards with 14 and set a career high by averaging 2.8 yards per carry. Obviously, neither of those totals are even the slightest bit good. White's gotten some chances, and he's failed to capitalize on them. If you know of any of White's contributions to the Bucs this season, odds are it's in a negative context, as you remember him fumbling the opening kickoff against the Kansas City Chiefs on Sunday Night Football, which set the tone for that entire game. Now obviously, we're 5 games into a career, and we're only 16 rushing attempts into a career. To say that it's still super early and there's plenty of time to turn things around would be a massive understatement. Heck, there was a running back in 1999 who got the ball 20 times over his first 6 games and picked up 31 yards, averaging just a hair above 1.5 yards per carry. That running back was a guy named Kevin Falk, who wound up becoming an instrumental part in the success of the New England Patriots dynasty, and played in the NFL all the way until 2011, carving out a 13-year career for himself, which is impressive for any position, let alone a running back where most guys would dream of having a career even half as long. But this start by White feels different. This start by White feels unusually bad. And that's when I got to digging. Because when you break it down, unfortunately, This start by Rachaad White is historically bad, to the point where history is not even the slightest bit on his side. Here's the criteria that I looked at, wanting to look at running backs that are rookies with incredibly similar starts to that of White, since that's the whole purpose of this exercise. Number 1, you had to carry the ball at least 15 times, so you had to average at least 3 carries a game. Number 2, you had to play in each of the first 5 weeks of the season. It doesn't necessarily mean you had to have a carry in all 5 weeks, but it just means that you had to play and touch the ball. The first 2 criteria kind of go hand in hand. I don't want to look at a running back that didn't play the first 3 or 4 games, then got thrust into action and moved up the depth chart, and had an absolute stinker. I don't want to focus on the one-offs. I'm looking for a consistent form of suck here. Number 3, you had to have at least 1 fumble. Being bad by just not picking up yards isn't enough. At least one time, whether it was on the ground or on special teams like White had, you had to put the ball on the ground. And number 4, you had to average less than 2.5 yards per carry. In other words, if you got the ball 4 times, your average had to be to a point where it wouldn't even be enough for a first down. So just to recap, you have to be a rookie running back with at least 15 carries through the first 5 weeks. You had to have played in every game. You had to fumble at least once, and you had to average less than 2.5 yards per carry over that stretch. In other words, you had to be consistently inefficient in just about every single way possible. And for this, the good news is that White's start is not unprecedented. He's got company, as 3 other rookie running backs in the over century-long history of the NFL have done this. The bad news is that, well, it's not exactly good company. The first name to appear on this list, and the most recent name, comes from 2015, when the Indianapolis Colts spent a 6th-round pick on Mississippi State running back Josh Robinson. Between Vic Ballard and Josh Robinson, I don't know what it was with general manager Ryan Grigson spending late-round draft picks on Mississippi State running backs, because he seemed to love doing that just as much as he loved to neglect doing anything to improve the offensive line. Robinson got off to an absolutely abysmal start to his career. In the first 5 weeks of the season, he had just 39 rushing yards on 17 carries, averaging under 2.3 yards per carry, and had his worst performance, without a doubt, in Week 4 against the Jacksonville Jaguars, when he had 3 carries for 2 yards, averaging less than a yard per carry, and losing a fumble. So was Robinson able to recover from that poor start to his career and turn things around? Absolutely not. After his 5th week, which was a game against the division rival Houston Texans, where he had 3 carries for 6 yards, he was made inactive, and didn't suit up in any of the team's next 4 games before getting waived and never playing in the NFL again. I should know with Robinson that he has bounced around some other football leagues, including the CFL, the Spring League, fan-controlled football, and I kid you not, the Maple League, which is the top football league in Finland. But in terms of ever making it in the NFL again, nope. Prior to him, the last guy to do this was William Green, who was drafted by the Cleveland Browns in the 1st round of the 2002 NFL Draft. Okay, so Robinson was a 6th-round pick, so it's not like he was expected to do much of anything anyways, or maybe even make it onto the roster. Green is a guy that actually has expectations surrounded for him, and is a guy that people had high hopes for, especially considering his draft status and what he did with Boston College. Unfortunately for White, Green is one of the biggest draft busts in the history of the Cleveland Browns franchise. In fact, since the Browns rejoined the NFL in 1999, if we exclude quarterbacks from the mix, a lot of people would say that Green is the biggest draft bust that the team has ever had. Through the first 5 weeks of his rookie season in 2002, he had just 97 rushing yards on 44 carries, averaging 2.2 yards per carry, and losing 2 fumbles, both of which came in a 31-28 victory against the Tennessee Titans. He even got a start in Week 5 against the Baltimore Ravens, to which he responded to that opportunity by picking up 2 rushing yards total. Now, while Green had his moments, as his famous 178-yard, 2-touchdown performance in the regular season finale against the Atlanta Falcons got the Browns into the playoffs for the first time since 1994, those moments were few and far between, far less than what you'd expect out of a 1st-round pick. He was out of the NFL by the middle of the 2005 season. He never started another game after the 2004 season, and he only had 2,109 rushing yards and 9 rushing touchdowns in his career. For a first-round pick, that's terrible. For the first running back off the board, well, that's just atrocious on so many levels. And prior to him, the last guy to do this was Leland McElroy, who was drafted by the Arizona Cardinals in the second round of the 1996 NFL Draft with pick number 32. And after a somewhat solid though unspectacular debut against the Indianapolis Colts in Week 1, where he had 63 rushing yards, it was all downhill from there, as he picked up just 11 rushing yards total over the next 4 weeks, including a game the following week in Week 2 on Sunday Night Football against the Miami Dolphins, where he had 6 carries for -5 rushing yards and a fumble. Over the first 5 weeks of the season, you're looking at a running back that had 74 rushing yards on 35 carries, averaging 2.1 yards per carry, so he easily fits the criteria established. As for how his career turned out the rest of the way, he's one of the biggest draft busts that the Cardinals have ever had since moving to Arizona, and might be the biggest bust they've had at the running back position. He finished his career with a mere 729 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns, and was out of the NFL for good after the 1997 season. A second-round pick only lasting 2 seasons in the NFL is not ideal to say the least, but that's how bad McElroy was. The Cardinals didn't want to keep him, even though they had the same head coach the whole time in Vince Tobin, so it's not like a new regime wanted to make its stamp and cut players they had no ties to, and no team wanted to pick him up. He was that bad. So that's the data set we're working with here, where Rachaad White fits in. You've got Josh Robinson from 2015, a guy who had a very similar start to White and was so bad that he never played again. You've got William Green from 2002, a guy who had a very similar start to White and would go down as one of the biggest busts in the history of the Cleveland Browns franchise. And you've got Leland McElroy from 1996, a guy who had a very similar start to White and would go down as one of the biggest busts in the history of the Arizona Cardinals. Josh Robinson, William Green, Leland McElroy, and now Rachaad White. On one hand, again, this is a set of 3 players that we're talking about here. Granted, a lot had to go wrong to get into this set in the first place. You had to be getting opportunities and failing on every single one of them. You had to fumble the ball, and you had to be getting practically nothing every time you tried to run the ball. But it is a sample size of 3 nonetheless. Plus, there are ways that White stands out from that admittedly terrible pack. Unlike the other 3 guys, White has actually found the end zone, as he scored a rushing touchdown against the Kansas City Chiefs. And unlike the other 3 guys, White seems pretty competent in the passing game. He's got 10 receptions for 85 yards, while the other 3 running backs in the set combined had 7 for 38 yards. On the other hand, you can't deny it. You can't sugarcoat it. This is not good company to be in whatsoever. If you're being compared this early on to Josh Robinson, William Green, and Leland McElroy, you're in serious trouble. And that's putting it lightly. Whether Rachaad White can turn things around and show off his skills like he did at ASU remains to be seen. But one thing is for certain. Right now, Rachaad White is not exactly on the white side of history. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at Jaguar Gator 9. To see college football videos, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. So you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.